So, moving on to our next session under the deliberately provocative title of White Supremacy is Not a River in Egypt. I hope that joke works. I hope I'm not the only one who gets that joke. But we've got Nick Davis from the CBC. We have Sri Skip Griffith of Griffith Consulting, and Olu Adeze from Ikenga Creative Lab, and finally Melanie Napina Cadley from the Indigenous Screen Office in Canada. There you guys are. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Back to follow. Got a lot out of them in 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, let's see. We'll do the same here with you guys. So yeah, I want to look at what is. I mean, we're frankly from a youth point of view, we take the position that it's basically like it or not, it is a white supremacist world we're living in, and that's where we're starting from. So, how do we work within that? Now, we were chatting a little bit about this beforehand, and we addressed it a little bit in the previous session, but. I mean, is this new? Is any of this new? Because it's, from a certain pearl clutching point of view, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so different and terrible and awful. And I think it is, but then again, maybe not so much, depending on your point of view. So I don't know if anybody wants to jump in and kind of tackle that. And we have a real array of people here. And I apologize, I haven't really introduced you properly. We've got representatives from Canada, from the UK, and from the US. And I think it's interesting to get all these different points of view on this particular moment. In fact, actually, why don't I because you have such different roles and all the different things you're doing, could you just do maybe a short, two sentences each about what you're doing, and then that will kind of give a bigger picture of where you're all coming from. Olu, do you want to start? Just really, just who you are and what you do.
Hey all, my name's Olu. I have worked across multiple industries in the creative space: fashion, film, music, theatre, TV. Film, my entry has been very unconventional, so I came up myself. And I founded a production company at the end of 2023. My focus is on scripted content as well as documentary. And I sit on the board of trustees for the Documentary Film Council in the UK, which is the first of its kind, and is advocating for independent documentary filmmakers in the space. So that's me.
Amazing. Nick.
I'm Nicholas Davis, and everyone calls me Nicky, but I work at CBC Broadcasting in Canada. I'm the executive director of equity and inclusion here. I have been for the last 6 or 7 years, but I started here 28 years ago as a national reporter. I used to produce documentaries. I produced radio programs. I spent 9 years in program development, so I have a lot of, I've touched many parts of the broadcast industry in terms of creating content as well as managing and supervising people to do that as well.
Thank you. Cerise?
Hi, everybody. My name is Cerise Griffith. I live in Los Angeles. I have spent my last 30 years of my career creating transformative access initiatives for young people of color to enter the nonprofit, education, design, and entertainment fields. I developed programs 20 years ago for the Television Academy and the Writers Guild. I developed an Institute for Diversity for USC, and I've been in this game of DEI before it was called DEI. So it's just going to be called something else now. So it's an ongoing pleasure, and I've just hung up my consulting hat to do more of it.
Amazing. Melanie?
Anin Indigenous Kwatotem. Hello, my name is Melanie Nipanak Hadley. I'm a member of Minagozibe Anishinaabe. I was lucky enough to be born Ojibwe, so I'm totally on Cerise's side. This is not the first time we've had an oppression, not the first tyrant I've experienced in my life. I am currently at the Indigenous Screen Office, which is a publicly funded office that supports content development and other aspects of Indigenous creativity within the screen-based industries in Canada. However, prior to that, I actually worked in DEI for Warner Brothers Discovery. I also worked with Nikki over at the public broadcaster. He was literally like my saving grace every time I needed to vent. He had an open door. But I've been in film and television most of my life, and sort of found myself as the lonely only, which I'm sure a lot of you have. So I'm excited to dig into this conversation.
Okay, so is this just the same old thing, or is it dangerous to say it's the same old thing?
I could start. I would just say that, and I'm going to piggyback off something Cerise said and something that Melanie said. This is not new at all. People opposing any type of initiatives to support people from equity deserving groups. It's not new at all. We just never had a title for it. We now have an acronym for it that people hate the acronym, but it's not new at all. I remember trying to do this work in 2002. CBC TV asked me to help. How do we get more diverse people to watch hockey in Hockey Night Canada? Because we had the rights for NHL hockey. And all the ideas that were put on the table back then were pushed back on heavily by the people who were making hockey at the time, which was a room full of exclusively white men. And they just thought that this was all crazy. So the pushback is not new. What is new, though, is that people are now more open to support those choices and support that attitude and that position more publicly, because there's an atmosphere that's being created where people feel safe that they can say, we don't want this, or this isn't right, or this is wrong around the EDI initiative. That's what's changed. I think people have always felt that way. They just haven't expressed it publicly, but I think they do that now, just like the women said around some of the issues around women and equity in the business. People have always pushed against it, but they just now feel that it's safe to say it publicly because you have support from a somewhat weird majority of people who think that's the right thing to do.
And I would add really quickly, it's not a weird majority, it's a weird minority of people, quite honestly.
I know, that's why I use the word weird. I don't think it's a
I would say what's changed is that people have been given license, and I think they've been given license to be overtly supremacist and divisionary and all of those things. And we are giving them license, but without question. And I think that we have to begin to say to ourselves, we are stronger together. I think someone else said that earlier, and I think you'll speak to that earlier. But the global majority is not white, male, and rich. Mm-hmm. And yet, the white, male, and rich are making outrageous decisions about what we can and cannot do. And I would only say that this DEI issue has become inextricably linked to financials. Mm-hmm. And because there's so much funding that is dependent on government in the US, these schools are canceling programs because funding is attached. These organizations are canceling programs because they're currying favor with the administration. So we are in a situation where DEI, which used to be called something else and will be called something else in the future, does never go away. But what it does do is this particular time encourages the global majority to stick together. And within the entertainment industry, it's not sticking together to be negative. It's sticking together to continue to help our allies who are at the top, who are white men and white women who are at the top and in most of those rooms, having them be allies in whose voices are missing when these conversations are being had about what you greenlight and who's playing the role and all of that. So that's my opinion.
That's it. Olu, so you're coming at it from you live in the UK.
Yes.
You're in London. And it'd be interesting to hear kind of what's your perspective on, I mean, we've talked about the US and all that's going to those bad guys in the US doing all this horrible stuff over there. But what's your perspective? What's your experience been in the UK?
So there are parallels and there aren't. I think that the position that we're in is that we don't have kind of it being embedded into policy in the way that you guys have. That doesn't mean that the organizations that are headquartered, particularly like large tech organizations that are headquartered in the in the UK, like US companies basically that have their headquarters here, aren't rolling out the same policy. So that is happening. But I wouldn't say that it's to the exact degree. I think another thing as well is that there's like a massive grey area at the moment. And I think ours will unfold in quite a subtle way. I always like to talk about racism in the UK as quite like kind of underneath the surface, whereas in the US it's very overt. So here it kind of happens, and it could kind of almost brush past your face, and you don't know. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think what we might start to see is perhaps in encoded language, and in organizations that perhaps decide to drop it, but then counter it with something else that sounds really kind of word salady, but actually what they're saying is they're not committed to DEI. I think that might be something that we see, but I'm not so sure quite yet because it's slowly unfolding. And just to piggyback off of what everybody was saying before, Nick and Cherise, and Mel, I don't think that it's new. Of course it's not. I think the history of any kind of oppressive structure is intrinsically linked to this issue. But what's really interesting to me, I think, is what has to change actually is not necessarily it's not the DI, it's not even the language, because the language will change, it will become something else, because we've had an evolution of language and we've had an evolution of pushback whenever there's kind of racial progress or whenever there's kind of more enlightenment around the fact that, hello, there's like so many different people in the world and you kind of have to get over it. But I think that what has to change is how we respond. I think that the response, like over the years, have been the response has been quite it's been a bit like fancy. It's been like really kind of like fairies and a bit kumbaya for me. And I think that if people who are so kind of anti-DEI embed this into law, and they're that strategic and they have these long-term plans, and that they kind of bolster that with funding and with resource. I think we have to do the same. I think we have to do them 10 better. I think we have to be 100 steps ahead, and counter that, and reimagine what it looks like to not just resist, but create ecosystems in which that noise and that kind of quote unquote power becomes obsolete. Therese was saying that there's way more of us. That's absolutely true. But I don't think that we've actually really, what's the word? I don't think that we're living from that place, or that we're responding from that place, from that realization, from that fact. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's interesting with that. I think looking at the sort of the structure that you have a structure, or you have institutions, or you have an industry that's kind of built on these foundations of like, this is the way we do it, and this is the world we live in, and this is the these are the gates that you have to find your way in. But are there better ways of doing things? And we had talked about this before when we were chatting about specific groups, local communities doing their own thing and finding their own ways of creating content that's not having to rely on the good intentions of Netflix or whoever. Melanie, do you have? I mean, what has been your experience?
The one I would say, like what Cerise is saying is, sorry, we're all just piggyback off Cerise now. But I would say that the thing that we have now that I don't know if we had it in, at least in my career, in the time that I've been working these last couple decades, is the allyship across underrepresented groups. So that global majority is actually more connected now, I think, than they at least were when I was coming up. Here in Canada, I'm not even in Canada, so I mean colloquially, in Canada, we have the Indigenous Screen Office. We also have the Black Screen Office. We have the Disability Screen Office. We sort of have created our own spaces, which is something we did in the most oppressive of times. But we've created our own spaces. Of course, now like we're very lucky at the ISO. We do have a permanent funding. But it's like I believe in it, but like it's paper. But I do think that even amongst those screen offices, like the more momentum that we get, it helps the other screen offices. We actually have this relationship. I feel like when I was coming up, the space that my community created for ourselves was exclusively Indigenous, right? And I started my career in that space, and then I branched out and went to CBC and Warner Brothers Discovery, and then came back to that space, which it's been like literally like coming home, you guys. It's incredible. But coming back to the space now and seeing that our little corner of the industry is still our corner of the industry, but it has these lines out, right? And it has this feeling of just like we are sharing knowledge with each other. Because ultimately, even though we have this status, we are still oppressed in the larger system, right? Like we are still oppressed, even though we've gained this ground and what have you. So I think the one thing that I'm not excited about it because the contraction is going to be hard for people, and we're not going to see certain organizations survive. We're not going to see certain talent be able to thrive. But the one thing that I'm holding sort of is that we do sort of have these lines out to the other corners of the underrepresented communities, and that is feeling somewhat more exciting in a small way because we are resourceful people. We have survived genocide. You know what I mean? Like we are so resourceful that I'm just like, yeah, you know what? When we get shoved in our corner again, I just think it's going to be different than it had been in the past.
And is there something different and better than just going to the CBC and saying, hey guys, we've got this sort of this great project we want to do, or going to the studios, or going to Netflix, or going to are you still having to like find a way to going to the same institutions or the same companies to try to get them on side?
I don't know if you're going to
are you still stuck with that, or is there a better way?
I think what you're talking about is like the onboarding that a lot of people who are not white have to do in conversations when they're pitching. And I'm somebody who received thousands of pitches throughout my career as a network executive where I was doing development and production. And what you do when you're an underrepresented storyteller is you come in the room and you're like, oh God, nope, of course I'm not going to be pitching somebody for my community. Now I got to quickly onboard them so they understand my experience and whatever. And I will say that in the course of time that I worked at CBC, I'm not attributing this to me by any means, but I will say that I did see this sort of evolution of storytellers coming in. And once they saw me or Karen Sang or Nicole Mendez, other underrepresented people in that room, which CBC still has those folks like Leah Marin, they all of a sudden don't feel like they need to do the onboarding as much anymore. They believe that there's an enlightenment on the other side of the table. So they just get into the human story. So I don't know if there's going to be that same level of like, oh God, I have to do so much work to get these people to understand, because people are in there. I think the work is going to come once you are in the development cycle and now you're fighting for a potential green light. It's always going to be competitive, whether you are from whatever community. It's always competitive. But once you get in, I think that's when it's going to get really tricky. But I still think that that little door we made still exists. And I don't think they can claw that back now. Although I'd be interested to hear Nikki. He's going to be like, wrong.
It's not that I don't think they can claw it back. I just, there's something that Cerise said that, and I think Olu referred to it as well, that, the global majority of the people are people from equities or groups. But the global majority of the power still lives with a particular group of people, mostly white wealthy men. And the problem is those white men, they were like, at least the ones they were elected in, even though there's this global majority of people who probably wouldn't, who may or may not see a benefit, but they're elected in somehow by a system that, of course, supports the whole white supremacy, by a system that supports them keeping in power. And that's the part that I think, and I think Olu is right. Like, we have to change the way we respond. I think it's how we respond to this particular event that's happening right now around the work we do. And if we don't change the response, we're going to have the same result as before, and it just puts us 100 yards behind the finish line again. Like we keep moving further back. So we make all this progress, and then this happens, and now the goalposts are now moved further ahead, and now we have still the same or greater distance to go. And so if we don't change our response to how we deal with this, and I think there's the one thing I think Olu's so right about, and I think Cerise is on said similar thing, is how do we make the global majority recognize that they actually hold more power than they think, and they actually can actually affect change. You know,
Yeah.
if they actually, like, we have to figure out how do we, and that's the response. And I'm really interested in figuring out how we get to that point, because otherwise, Melanie, I think we are going to have, those doors might close, and we may have to figure out a way to jam them open again, because it might be so long before we get back to that same position we forgot, or we may have forgotten how to get there, or how to open that door to walk through it again. So I'm really interested in hearing how we actually, like, what that changing response looks like, because I think it's a really, really important point.
Yeah, is that, I mean, like, what is the, do you have to, like, yeah, I guess that's what you asked. Do you have to sort of change response? Do you have to spring into action in a different way now in March 2025 than you did 6 months ago?
Well, go ahead. Olu, do you want to go?
No, go ahead. I've hold a thought.
I was going to say, what's the change in response? I think that we have to step back a little bit to talk about the change in response, because there's a couple of things happening in our society right now. DEI is about belonging, and more than it is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's really more about belonging. And the question is, do the people who are in positions of power believe in belonging, or do they believe they have to be convinced? Because this is what's been happening across centuries, is we've been trying to convince people in power that we have talent, that we have agency, that we have voice, and our stories need to be told in media and television and film, right? And we spend, like you said, Melanie, when you show up in the room, you got to, like, do I have to explain? Do I have to explain? You know, and it's like, and that is part of knowing your audience. Does your audience believe that you belong, or does your audience need to be convinced that you belong?
Yeah.
And I think that's how we change things, is we start asking that question, because DEI in America, and this is no offense to my women out there, but DEI in America has been made to believe, people have been made to believe it's opening all these doors for people of color, particularly Black people, and that is not the case. It's white women who have benefited the most from DEI programs and fundings and placements in America. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. We got more women. We got more women that are at the table. But this is all about, in my opinion, being at the table. And when the last panel, a person said it was so powerful, she said that she could turn to the people that were in positions of power and say, do you have a daughter? You know, that is powerful, because they will think twice. But they don't necessarily have a person of color that is in their family. So I think that one of the other things that we can do to change the way that we react this time is to keep asking the question, who's impacted, whose voice is not in this room? Because if you ask the question, and you need your allies to ask the question. You can't, because we can't always be in the room, because we're always the only one in the room, right? So it's really important that the allies are the ones who begin to ask the question, who's being impacted by these decisions that's not in this room? Whose voices are we speaking for? And I think that that's part of it. The other thing I will say is a lot of pushback that you get when you have this kind of fear reaction to change is you have a lot of leadership say, I can't tell you how many boardrooms I've been in. We can't find the talent. Like, where's the
Oh
talent?
God.
We can't find them. And I always have to take a breath, count to 10, and just say what I always say, which is universities are factories of talent. If you look, they are factories of talent. And if you look, you will find the people not only who have the talent, who have trained, who have learned, but who rise above many other people in their class because they're bringing a bit different perspective and they have the tools and foundation now. So they're excellent hires for you,
Mm,
but you have to want to hire them.
yeah. Wow.
Amazing.
Um,
I'm so sorry, but
oh
we've got to
no.
stick to
No,
time.
we got to hear Olu have something to say. Let's just hear Olu first, please, 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 please. I want to hear what she has to say.
Okay, yeah, go.
I'm going to be very, very quick. Everybody said so much, but I just really think that we do need to like reimagine what it is. I think that we need a bit of a village meeting and we need to reimagine our structures. I think we're too married to the structures that we have now. I think Nick said something about the system, and I think we are part of that system who vote these people in. We are also part of that system, not necessarily us individually, everybody in their own way, that bolster these systems of oppression. So, for instance, there's this thing about okay, we could talk about DEI and organization and they can kind of like signpost, but what's the organizational culture in there? There's Black Leaders in TV in the UK, and they're doing some research at the moment, and what they're actually doing is asking actual questions. How are you being treated as a person of color / Black person in this organization? How is it that you're going into work and despite this signposting being told, oh, your hair looks like this, or you look like that, or you're still encountering microaggressions despite this being embedded into policy? So that's also being ignored, right? Those people are still part of that system. And so I just feel like there is an aversion to change, despite even from those people who are claiming to be part of the change. And I think we need to question what we're unwilling to let go of. I know that Nick said that, like, you know, these white dudes, they have the money, they have the power, but I'll be damned. I really don't think they're God. I don't think that they're like they're penultimate. Sometimes it feels so fixed, and I feel like that's so disempowering, and it's just not the reality. When you talk about the numbers, when you talk about the resource, our systems are also interconnected. So the TV and film industry is not disconnected to politics. It's not disconnected to what's happening in Congo. It's not disconnected to education, you know, in Nigeria. It's just not disconnected. And so we have to think about it robustly. And then the last thing is also that means if we're thinking about power, then we have to think about how do you empower if this is about shifting power away. This is an international development organization, and they're not in the creative space, but they have this thing called the Global Summit on Community Philanthropy. And what they're doing at the moment is that they're working on this program where they effectively are exploring community philanthropy, and they're empowering individuals in their community to divest away from foreign aid, right? Because whoever is giving you aid has power over you. So how do we create our own power? What does that look like? Really, really look like? And we can sit in a little village meeting or a large village meeting and figure out what that is, because we're moving away from an old world and we're moving away from an old system, and we might have to pull our big girl and boy and they pants up and kind of rip parts of ourselves that we've become so accustomed to. But that is what it takes. Otherwise, we are going to chase our tails for another 100 years and maybe another septillion years now that AI is here, because then that just advances the kind of issues that we have. So yeah, anyway, sorry to...
Amazing.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I would love to keep talking, but I have committed to staying on time. And you know, limits, right? Limits create creative thinking. This is what I'm shooting for. This is my excuse for cutting you off. I'm so sorry, but that was amazing. And we're moving to our next panel.